I'm Leon Todd for G66. Welcome to another Tuesday Tone Tip. On today's video, we're going to dive into some advanced parameters in the amp block. This is a video that was requested in a comment recently, so if there's any topics that you would like me to cover in upcoming Tuesday Tone Tip videos, leave your suggestions in the comment section below. But I will just preface this video by saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should with these. I think for probably 90% of the amp models that I use in here, that I just stick to this authentic tone page on here. And if I'm not getting what I want out of a particular amp model within 30 seconds or 60 seconds, I will just move on and try a different amp model. So keep all of these tips in mind. They are in no way essential. I think you can get some epic tones just by using the authentic tone page on here. But we're curious as guitar players, right? What can we do to these amp models to really customize them to our liking? So I'm going to use the Brit 800 for most of this. I've paired it up with my go-to Greenback Cab IR, LT TV Mix 7. In the preamp, I've got a low cut at 80 Hertz and a high cut at 10K, a little bit of Recording Studio C reverb, and I think this amp model sounds great for rock and roll at the stock settings. Fantastic, right? Now, one quirk about this particular amp model is that it's kind of got this like really harsh pick attack sometimes, you know, that kind of clicky, trebly thing that you could hear in there. And the very first little trick or tip that I would offer up here is setting the master volume on specific amp models. Something like the Brit 800 in the real world, you've got to crank up the master volume to really make those amps sound fantastic and kind of add some compression and get rid of a little bit of that harshness. To demonstrate, this is with the master volume at 2 on this amp model. I've just set it up stock settings except the master. I've compensated with the level control over here so we don't get into that quiet is not as good, loud is more good kind of dichotomy over there. And then on channel D, I've got everything the same but with the master at 7. So let's have a listen to the character of the amp with the master at those 2 settings. Quite a marked difference, right? You can hear that this setting with the master cranked up, you've got way more compression going on. The overall sound is smoother and a little less shrill. I really like that, and setting the master volume can be a really important thing to get the kind of character that you want out of a particular amp model. On something like this, cranking it up sounds really good. On something like a 5150 model or a dual rectifier, having it quite low might actually get you into the territory that you would expect from those amps. So let's go back to channel A over here. You know, 4 is pretty decent on here for the master, but I might just turn it up to 5 and get that nice intermediate zone. Let's hear it. Pretty cool. There is still a little bit of that kind of click in there, and what I would associate that with is actually the bright cap in the amp. So a common mod with these sort of amps was to clip the bright cap, so to remove it from the circuit. Now, as you turn the gain control on these amps up, the effect of the bright switch is less pronounced. I'll give you an example of this where I'll turn the gain up to 10, I'll turn the bright switch on and off. But with the gain lower, let's take it down below 5, you're really going to hear the effect of this bright switch. So that is an interactive pair of controls right there. What I would recommend is to basically set the gain control to where you like it. I'll turn it up above 5. And then you can play around with the bright cap value. Let's have a listen to what happens when I turn it down. So turning that down still gave me that character that I do like, where it's kind of adding a little bit of gain and aggression, but it has less of that click in there. So that's one kind of virtual mod that you can do. With the bright cap, you can either turn the bright switch off, or you can change the bright cap value. Keep in mind again that balancing that out with the gain control is going to be important. We've got a bunch of controls here as well: input boost, cut, and fat. Cut is going to apply a 120 hertz high pass filter before everything. So let's say you've got the bass cranked up on your amp and it sounded a bit muddy. What that is doing is just filtering out a little bit of low end from your tone there. And it's really handy with higher gain amps if you want a little bit of clarity. The fat switch is going to change the center frequency of the mid control in here. Let's have a listen to what it does with the Brit 800. I'll turn this bass back down. That one's pretty subtle with the Brit 800, but let me show you my favorite high gain amp in here, the USA Lead mid gain. The fat switch makes a big difference with this amp. And the cut switch is very effective there as well. The input boost, we can actually now navigate over to the preamp section. Let's go back to the Brit 800. We can select a variety of different input boosts in here. You can see treble boost, tube screamer, super overdrive, the shred boost, the RCB and AC boost, the CC boost. Basically what we're doing here is we are taking the characteristic EQ curve of a drive pedal like a tube screamer, removing the clipping component and just letting you turn the level up on it. So I'll do this. I'm going to select T808 on here. I'll set the boost level to 15 dB and I will kick it in on this amp. This mimics the kind of classic trick where you take a pedal with the drive on 0, level on 10, and then boost your amp. So that one's a great one if you don't want to add a drive block in there. We did talk about the cut switch before. You can actually set the low cut to whatever frequency you like. You know, the cut is set at 120 hertz. If you just wanted a more subtle or a more extreme low cut frequency, remember this is before all the drive, so it's kind of cleaning up the low end from your guitar. You can set it here with the low cut frequency. There's a bunch of stuff happening here, and this is definitely in the I never touch it category, but the saturation switch is an interesting one. This will do a virtual Jose style mod to your amp. So let's kick it on at the ideal setting. That will normalize the volume difference in here. That one can sound super nasty in there. I really like that for a kind of modded Marshall style tone. And there are several amp models in here, like the Cameron CCV models, which have this on by default. Really, really powerful. And again, you can tailor the saturation drive to whatever value works best for you in there. Let's go over to the Power Amp tab in here, because there's a few really powerful controls in here. One of my favorite is this master volume location. So you can set it either before the phase inverter, after the first triode stage, or post phase inverter. And this post phase inverter, or post pi as some people might call it, is super powerful in there. Basically, if you put it after the phase inverter, then the phase inverter in the amp, which in a Marshall style amp is a big part of the characteristic tone, is going to be getting smashed the whole time, and then you turn the volume up. So check this out. Where do we have the volume at the moment? We've got it at 5. I'm going to swap this from pre to post phase inverter. Awesome, right? The other really cool control in here is the negative feedback control. I would describe this from a tonal perspective as you turn it up higher, basically you're going to get a more strident, tight kind of tone out of there. Think of something like a Boogie Mark series. They have a lot of negative feedback in there, and it makes the behavior a little more linear and predictable. Something like a Vox AC30 or a dual rectifier is something that has no negative feedback, and we kind of associate those with like a loose sound in there. So a cool way to just get a bit of extra grunt out of your amp is to turn the negative feedback up. Pretty awesome, right? There's one more control on this page. It's the speaker impedance. And you can kind of simulate impedance mismatching on here, which is kind of fun. I like to turn this one up a little bit. Let's turn it up to about 1.2. Kind of pushing the mid-range a little bit. That one's really fun with Mark series amps if you want to kind of emulate the classic behavior that they had, because often they did not have, I think it was an 8 ohm tap, it was 4 ohms. So if you were running into like an 8 ohm cab or a 16 ohm cab, then you had this impedance mismatch, and it was kind of part of the sound in there. So power amp, all the other stuff I kind of leave alone. The phase inverter bias excursion is kind of fun. Same thing with the overall bias excursion. I never use those though. I would say play around with those and start with like values of plus or minus 20%. And if you can hear it, then it's good. And if you can't hear it, leave it alone. That is the golden rule with all of these things. I did a previous Tuesday tone tip on the bias tremolo in here. That one's super awesome as well. And it's worth noting that some amps in here have cathode followers and some don't. Like I think of the Marshall sound as something very inherently cathode follower-ish, like this kind of grunt and the zing and kerrang you get out of a Marshall. Part of it's to do with the cathode follower, whereas the really kind of smooth, compressed Mark series boogie, you can see, there's no cathode follower in here. So if you wanted a bit more of that, I guess you could add values in here. Again, something I never do, but I think the most powerful page in the advanced parameters is the speaker page. In particular, the speaker impedance curve. We have looked at this before, but let me just demonstrate. I'm going to go from this stock 4x12 Brit 800 to, I think it's the 4x12 Recto straight, and this gets kind of wild. Listen to how the overall response of the amp changes. You can hear a super cool low-end thud in there. And if you're playing through a real guitar cabinet with a solid-state power amp, very, very important to play around with this one and find the one that you like the best. Similarly with speaker thump, I pretty much leave it at 3 on all amps in there. And then the speaker drive parameter is a really interesting one. On anything except super saturated stuff, I like to turn it up to about 3. So if I was playing like a Fender style amp and I wanted a bluesy thing or like a Marshall style thing, I'll actually turn it up a little bit. Have a listen to what it does. Alrighty, pretty cool right there, just turning it up. It just kind of adds this really lovely, I don't know, like smooth but gritty. I know these are words that don't normally go together. It's just got this kind of level of crust, I'm going to use that term about it, that makes it sound really real to me. So that's a cool one. I actually normally turn that down a little bit when I'm using a lot of high gain, like a 5150, a Mark series, or a Rector. I'll turn that down to about 1. Speaker compression, again, that's more a like vintage style amp thing. You might want to add just a little bit of that in there. And you can play around with the speaker breakup parameter over here as well. I just pretty much leave it at medium most of the time with a lot of this stuff. We've got the input EQ section. You know, before I talked about the cut switch and the preamp low cut, well, you can do that in here as well. Let's say I want to set the low cut to about 80 hertz in here. But what's cool is I can use like a peaking EQ. Let's set it to say 800 hertz. And I can turn the gain up on that to give my amp a mid-range boost. This is great for your kind of late 70s, early 80s sort of tones. I also like to add a little bit of high cut sometimes. You can still hear that kind of bright cap click in this. I've purposefully left it in there because I wanted to demonstrate that with the bright cap earlier. But you know, you can set the high cut somewhere above 5K. This is a pretty cool little pre-EQ curve now. And if you were going for a really extreme mid-range boost in here, you're kind of going to get into that like Tom Scholz territory on here. Let's go like 14 dB. Really, really cool. It's kind of mimicking what we're doing with that preamp boost in there. You've got the output EQ, which you can set to various types. I'll go back to this Mark series amp because it's really important on the real amp and in the model. If I turn this off, it's pretty uninspiring, but when I kick in this classic Mark series curve, we get the chunk out of this amp. Very, very nice indeed. And again, you know, if you were on a Marshall and you wanted to dip a bit at 4K because it's really getting into your ears and boost a bit of 1K, that's pretty cool as well. And finally, we have the dynamics tab in here. The output compressor is the main one that I play around with. You know, you can set this to the gain enhancer, which is a lovely way to change or kind of optimize how your volume control roll-off works. This guitar has a really scratchy volume pot, so I'm not going to play around with that. Might be one for a future Tuesday tone tip if you're interested. But basically, like if you've got an amp model that maybe you hit with drive pedals and you set it up for an edge of breakup tone and you kick that drive pedal in and it makes the amp too loud, a little bit of output compression here really, really helps. We've also got the input dynamics on the Axe FX3 that can kind of work like a compressor or expander. You know, let's just hear it at 2 or -2. Very, very subtle. And if you listen to the tone at the start of the video and you listen to what I've got here, you might not think that I've improved it at all. And it's because I've applied so many of these deep parameter tweaks. Like I said at the start of the video, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think maybe like 1 or 2 of these max would go into any sort of amp tone that I would dial in here. I definitely wouldn't be using, say, 10 of them. I would just change to a different amp model. You know, there's nearly 300 amp models in here. There's a good chance that if you find one that works for you, you're probably going to stick with it. And then, you know, you want a bit of saturation, you want to change the input EQ, you want to try a different speaker impedance curve, you can do that. And of course, I haven't changed the cab block impulse response at all in there. That is another way to get some fresh tones and will be far more drastic than anything that I have done in here. So there's a bunch of stuff that I might do sometimes in the amp block. Again, I don't think you have to do any of this stuff, but it sure is fun. And if you like really getting into the weeds in here and customizing your tones, you know, no one else does it like Fractal. They give you so much control in here, and it really is up to you how you use that. I've seen people kind of criticize this and say that, oh, you know, there's too many advanced parameters. Well, you know, if you think that, just stick to the tone page on here. Use these and go. You do not have to tweak any of these to get epic tones. But if you want, you can get in there. That is a win-win in my opinion. I really hope you've enjoyed these tips. Thanks for putting up with me playing like a G, D, and A chord for the entire length of the video. If you've got suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments. And I hope you all have a fantastic week. See you all next Tuesday for another Tuesday Tone Tip.